Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle Haas. I hope you all had an amazing weekend. I know that I did because I had a nice little vacation for myself. But hey, it is Monday and we are rearing to go here. We got to talk about the hottest comics for the week of April 8th. This, of course, is Go Collect's Hot List. Now, for those who don't know, Go Collect puts out a bi-weekly article that switches between hottest comics and trending comics. And this week, we're taking a look at the hottest comics, which is the comics that have sold the most in the market. We're talking about volume of sales here and have had the biggest rise in the Hot 100 charts. But before I get into the article for today, if you guys could drop me a like or comment or subscribe if you're enjoying the content, help support the channel, doing those things, I would appreciate it. But let us get into the article here today. Of course, this thing is written by Matt Tuck. I will put a link in the description if you guys want to do further reading. But let us talk about the number 5 book. And the number 5 book is a very cool one. This, of course, is Something is Killing the Children, number 1, Local Comic Shop Day edition, up 36 spots, sitting in the number 50 slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the first issue of Something is Killing the Children, written by James Tynion. Now, this is one of those books that has actually had multiple printings since its initial run in 2020. We're talking about like 8 or 9 prints or so. And the one that we're focused on is the Local Comic Shop Day edition, which features the original cover with a little bit of a kind of glossy shine foil variant on top of it. But of course, Something is Killing the Children, one of the hottest indie books in the last couple years, really taken over the comic book collecting industry by storm. I mean, we've talked about James Tynion on this list many times before. Nice House on the Lake had been showing up week after week after week, and now it's Something is Killing the Children's turn to be showing up on this list. And what do you got to say about this book? This is just one that I think collectors have really been heavily speculating on for quite some time. A lot of people feel like there's going to be some Netflix show with this one, some movie franchise, some series, and there's been kind of a lot of mystique that has kind of been built around this book in the collecting industry. And for that reason, I actually feel like this is going to be one of those indie titles that has a lot of value from here on out throughout the rest of the collecting hobby. When we look back at books like Bone or Goon or even Walking Dead before that became what it was, those were those indie series that collectors were really passionate about. And I kind of feel like this title right here has kind of elevated itself into that echelon. Let me know what you guys think about that. If you think Something is Killing the Children is mostly valuable because of the speculative opportunity, or do we also feel like this is sort of a collector's collector book? And as we dig into the numbers for this one, we'll take a look at those 9.8s. There's 2,029 on the census. Fair market value suggests $80. 30-day moving is around the $86 range. So definitely not a book that is too expensive when we're talking about, getting down to that 8th and 9th print, the Local Comic Book Shop Day edition. And then down here at the bottom, you're not going to see it slabbed at the low grade, but typically speaking, when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies of this book, you can typically find it around that, $25, $30, $35 range, which is a major discount than if you were to get the first print of this book where you're looking at, $900 to $1,000. All right, let's go on now to the 4th hottest comic of the week. And the 4th hottest comic of the week is one that I'm very excited to talk about because a lot of people have been, commenting about this book on, the videos I've been doing on my channel. But this one right here is Marvel Spotlight number 28, up 37 spots, sitting in the 34th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, this would be known as the first solo story for Moon Knight, a book that came out in 1976, written by Doug Moench. Now, of course, we've been talking about Moon Knight, these last few months or so. Moon Knight is in full effect right now on Disney Plus, and all the Moon Knight keys have definitely been heating up in the market. Of course, there's Werewolf by Night 32, there's Moon Knight number 1, which we've talked about quite a few times on this Go Collect list, and now we got to talk about this book right here, Marvel Spotlight number 28. This was a book that actually was pretty hot for a while when everybody was kind of, starting to get into that speculation mode for Moon Knight. But then something happened to this book. It felt like this book took a dive next to the other ones. People really stopped pursuing this one or stopped looking for this one. And, one of the reasons for that is that, it's the first solo story. Now, people might value first solo stories. People may not value first solo stories. Maybe you can make an argument that this is his first name in the title, even though it is the Marvel Spotlight series. It does say Moon Knight right there at the top. So, for whatever reason, some people value these types of books. Some people don't value these types of books. But it felt like the market kind of spoke and more people were going for that Moon Knight #1 rather than this book right here. But now that Moon Knight is in full effect and this book took a massive correction, it kind of feels like now maybe people are starting to look at this book kind of bottoming out and thinking, hey, maybe it's a good time to jump back onto this book. Like ironically so, even though we're in the middle of the show, the prices are so much lower than where they were, say, a year ago. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, we'll take a look at some of the different grades here. We see 9.8, there's 80 on the census. Fair market value suggested to be $4,400. There was a sale, 90 days ago at the $4,600 range. Nothing in this last month, however. We take a look at the 9.6, $1,000 FMV, 30-day moving around the $1,100 range, and then a 9.4, 650 FMV, $703 around the 30-day moving range. Just to put it into perspective, when we're talking about 9.8s for Moon Knight #1, those books were hitting that kind of $1,000 range. So they're basically rivaling the prices you can get here for the 9.6 and the 9.4s, which does beg the question which one you would rather have. But as I open up the charts here, this one you can see, the market doesn't really know what it wants to do with this book. We can see here back in 2021, this one had a massive spike, around the September time, had a big correction. Now it's trending slightly upward once again. Similarly, at the other grade levels, we can see this book definitely had a massive spike in September and then really dropped off all the way down, to half of its value and is now kind of slowly trending upward again. So this is one of those books that had a big correction in comparison to all the other Moon Knight books. But let me know in the comments what you guys think about books like this, first solo story. Like, how do you feel about this? Would you rather have this book in comparison to Moon Knight #1? All right, let's move on now to the third hottest comic of the week. And the third hottest comic of the week is a very cool one. This one, of course, is a Star Wars book, but we're talking about Star Wars #2, up 37 spots, sitting in the 27th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this would be the second issue of the Star Wars run, a book that came out in 1977, written by Roy Thomas, and would feature the first appearance of Obi-Wan Kenobi, Han Solo, Chewbacca, Jabba the Hutt, etc. But the reason we're talking about it, of course, this week is due to the fact that this, of course, has the first in-story appearance of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now, we recently got that Obi-Wan Kenobi trailer that came out the other week. A lot of the books related to that show, the Inquisitor books, things like that, got really hot in the market. And now it feels like Star Wars #2 is slowly starting to creep back up. Now, this is a book much like Star Wars #1 and Star Wars #44 that has had a lot of peaks and valleys in these last couple years in terms of its values. I mean, it feels like the market doesn't really know what it wants to do with the Star Wars books, but in fairness, it feels like Disney doesn't really know what it wants to do with Star Wars either. So I get sort of the polarization of the values with this book. But, by all accounts, Obi-Wan Kenobi looks like it could be a really cool show. I mean, I feel like the jury is still out with a lot of Star Wars stuff, coming off of the Book of Boba Fett. It doesn't feel like the fans really love that, show. And it feels like the values for some of those books really had a pretty big pullback after we got, on the other end of it. So with this book right here, it feels like maybe we're far enough out from Obi-Wan where people are thinking, hey, may not be a bad time to buy into this book. And even if it does have a pullback, after the show, this is probably a good floor to get in on, considering the values of this book were much higher a year ago. And speaking of those values, let's take a look at some of the numbers here. We'll take a look at the 9.8s. There's 140 on the census. Fair market value suggested to be $1,750. 30-day moving is $1,920 and 1 year $2,645. So you can tell how much this book has actually kind of dropped off in recent times. We'll see last 2021, there was present day dollar value sales around the $4,300 range. Definitely had a big correction since that time. Last Heritage auction selling around the $1,920 level. And that's in comparison to the sale in December before that at the $3,150 price point. So definitely a book that had a big drop off in comparison to its previous record highs. But when I go into eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically you can find stuff around the $125 to $150 range or so. All right, let's go on now to the second hottest comic of the week. And the second hottest comic of the week is one that we actually talked about last week. In fact, actually the next two books are going to be books that we talked about in the last week's video. But this one right here is Amazing Spider-Man number 298, up 47 spots, now sitting in the 35th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this would be known as the first cameo appearance of Venom, a book that was written by David Michelinie in 1987 and also drawn by Todd McFarlane. This would also be known as Todd McFarlane's first artwork on the Spider-Man series. Now, not to belabor what we kind of talked about in last week's video where we were talking about this book, but one of the things I think is really interesting to point out with this one is I think the Todd McFarlane factor. You know, the more and more I think about it, the more and more I'm thinking that, you know, the nostalgia alone just for Todd McFarlane art is going to be a huge driver for a lot of comic book collectors, you know, kind of moving on into these next, you know, couple decades or so. I feel like his emergence onto the scene in the late 80s and 90s and like, you know, his historical significance to the comic book industry, even to today where he's still working on Spawn, you know, he's still doing NFT stuff. He's still making moves in, you know, the film and entertainment space. I really do feel like the brand of Todd McFarlane is like almost transcending that of comic book collecting. It feels like he is an artist that is almost bigger than his comic book persona. And I think one of the reasons that this book is showing up on the list is just due to that fact that people are thinking, hey, all of the Todd McFarlane stuff is significant. Yes, this is a cameo appearance of Venom. That's pretty cool as well. But this is the first artwork of Todd McFarlane on Spider-Man. And that's a pretty huge deal if you ask me. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, we'll take a look here at the 9.8s. There's 817 on the census. Fair market value has it around the $800 range. 30-day moving, however, 856, so kind of right in line. And you can see that this is a book that has had a lot of volatility in its history. Definitely had, you know, some record highs and then now is kind of hitting some record lows. Last couple sales here, $777 as opposed to the $1,000 range. So definitely interesting to see that in just a month's time, there's such a big price difference here at the 9.8 grade. One of the other things I think it would be funny to show you guys here is at the 9.0 level, there's 679 on the census, fair market value around the $110 range. But just take a look at this graph and talk about a book that has seen some peaks and valleys in its time. I feel like this is a graph that is perfectly representative of a book like this, where it's never going to really know how it wants to be valued. There's going to be different times in collecting that people are going to want to jump on this thing and then forget about it and then jump on it again. But either way, it's a great book. First cameo appearance of Venom and first Todd McFarlane artwork on Spider-Man. Of course, I didn't show you the low grade slabs for this thing, but typically speaking, when I go into eBay looking for raw copies, you can find them around that $75 to $125 range, depending on the deal, depending on the grade that you can find for yourself. All right, let's move on now to the hottest comic of the week. And the hottest comic of the week is the #1 book that was on the trending list last week. And this one, of course, is Nova #1, up 49 spots, now sitting in the #4 slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the first appearance and origin of Richard Rider Nova, a book that came out in 1976, written by Marv Wolfman. Now, we've already talked about this book a few times before, so I won't belabor it. But of course, this is a book that got hot because of the deadline announcement that one of the Moon Knight writers is going to be developing a Nova, probably Disney Plus show or movie. So everybody went nuts. I mean, when you get an official announcement like that, everybody jumps on this book. But, you know, this, of course, is a character that's been heavily speculated on for quite some time. And definitely this is one of those books that, you know, not only is moving in terms of volume, it is setting new record high prices at all grade levels. It is selling at, you know, new record high prices for its raw comic book prices. So this is a book that I think is really interesting. And one of the things I'd love to ask you guys is, what do you feel about this character overall, Richard Rider Nova? Is this one of those characters that, you know, it feels like people are wanting to heavily speculate on, like the Eternals or Shang-Chi or characters like that, you know, people are thinking, hey, when we get this movie, we're going to sell this book or we're going to flip this character? Or do you feel like this character is for real? Are there a lot of fans of Richard Rider Nova? Are there a lot of fans of this character? And are people going to hold their books when we eventually get, you know, those movies and shows in the MCU? Let me know what you guys think about the prices where they are right now. Are these prices good ones to get in on? Or do you think that these are going to be prices that heavily correct, you know, a few months from now after this news media cycle has passed us? But speaking of numbers, let's talk about them now. We'll take a look at the 9.8s. There's 507 on the census. Fair market value suggested to be around the $26 $2,600 range. 30-day moving is around $2,800. There was a record high sale that was actually at the $3,000 plateau. 9.6, 1,200 on the census. Fair market value at the $600 range. 30-day moving right in line at 643. And then, down here across all grade levels, there's been, record high sales basically across the board. Even at the 7.0 range and the 5.0 range, I think that has actually set new record highs as well. And now when you go onto eBay looking for this book, even at the low grade in the raw form, typically now I'm seeing it being sold around the $135 to $140 range or so, which is, higher than what it was going for a few weeks ago, where you could find raw copies around that $100 price point. Anyways, that's all for this video. Those were Go Collect's hottest comics for the week. Let me know what you guys think. Do you guys have any of these books? Drop me a like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the content, and I will see you in the next one.